I feel that I have many things in common with Frankenstein's creature, including being very tall and struggling to make new friends. And one of the things we have in common that I greatly enjoy is that we both really love John Milton's Paradise Lost. Much like Frankenstein's creature, I read Paradise Lost before I had ever read any part of the Bible. And like Frankenstein's creature, this story and its characters are very dear to me, especially Satan. Paradise Lost has had this massive influence, not just on me and Frankenstein's creature, but on literature and language and storytelling. I mean, it's one of the most impactful pieces of fan fiction of all time. It is just this beautifully written, sweeping epic about tyranny and ambition and curiosity and loss. You get these larger-than-life depictions of scenes of celestial warfare and these really intimate moments of domestic married life, large-scale destruction and interpersonal betrayal and disappointment. These thematic explorations of pride and desire and bitterness and innocence and corruption. And it's all delivered through the most delicious language and through these characters who you just want to sink your literary analytical teeth into. I know that this is a classic that a lot of people are intimidated by or think would be boring. Let me switch this out for my thinner version, actually. Look, this isn't some big, long, boring, intimidating book. It's so thin, it's so manageable, it's so approachable. You should read it, and I'm going to tell you why. We'll start with my absolute favorite part of Paradise Lost, and that is the character of Satan. The poet William Blake famously said that John Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, because despite himself, despite Milton being this very devout religious man, he drew in Satan such a compelling and complex character that you can't help but connect to him. Like I said, Paradise Lost is essentially fan fiction of the Bible, and it's an expansion of the brief story of original sin in the Bible. The snake enters into the garden and tempts Eve to eat the fruit. But what is only a few lines really in Genesis becomes this massive epic poem. And Milton was able to expand that brief story out into this epic in large part because of how much attention he pays to every character and how much he fleshes out their interiority. And nowhere is that more apparent and more impactful than in the character of Satan. As a clarifying side note, I know that the word Bible is in my username, but it's just a book history joke. In case you couldn't tell from me saying that I read Paradise Lost before ever reading a Bible, I have no religious background, no religious affiliation. It's all just literature to me. The entire epic opens with Satan lying in hell, basically concussed because he has just been tossed out of heaven following the war that he and his rebellious angels fought against the loyal angels and against God. And so even though this epic is centrally concerned with original sin, even though the loss that it is purportedly exploring throughout this is Adam and Eve's loss of the Garden of Eden, the loss we begin with is Satan's. We enter into this narrative with Satan, seeing hell through his eyes and seeing his grief over all that he has lost, and hearing him harden himself to this loss and announce that he has decided it would be better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. We follow him as he journeys in this cosmic void in the space between hell and the Garden of Eden. We see him see the Garden of Eden for the first time, see Eve for the first time. He continually has these moments of introspection and almost of vulnerability. And at every checkpoint along the way, he decides to go further into this anger and corruption and desire to corrupt others. Part of the reason that anti-heroes are constantly so compelling to us in storytelling is that we recognize some seeds of our own worst impulses for anger and bitterness and destruction, exaggerated out into a larger scale in these characters. Milton's Satan is one of the great anti-hero characters in all English literature. Really, I think he's one of the great characters in all of English literature. And I truly think it's worth reading Paradise Lost if for no other reason than to read and to analyze this character. And I am not alone in that opinion. Paradise Lost has been influencing other people, especially other writers, for centuries, particularly through the character of Satan. We can see that, as I've already mentioned, in Frankenstein. In Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, after Victor Frankenstein has driven his creation away and the creature is wandering the world alone and rejected by everyone he comes in contact with, he eventually finds shelter in a shed adjoining a cabin, and he gets his hand on some books. And through these books and through observing the family that lives in the adjoining cabin, he learns to read, to speak, and to understand the world around him. And he mentions 3 books by name that shaped his understanding of the world and of humanity. One is Plutarch's Lives, one is Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, and the third is Paradise Lost. Let the record state that when I just now picked up my copy of Frankenstein and opened it, intending to try to find the page where the creature is talking about Paradise Lost, which I did not have bookmarked, even though I knew I was going to read from it, I opened immediately to the correct page. My book knew. The creature says this: Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it as I had read the other volumes which had fallen into my hands as a true history. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often referred the several situations as their similarity struck me to my own. Like Adam, I was created, apparently united by no link to any other living being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of a superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Adam's kind of a nerd, but we relate to Satan because he's complicated like we are. The Romantic writers generally were very influenced by Paradise Lost and by Milton's Satan. Not just Mary Shelley, but also Percy Shelley and Byron and Keats. And far beyond just the Romantic writers, in the wider 19th century, but also in the 20th and 21st centuries, writers have continued to be influenced by Paradise Lost, to reference this text, to adapt it, to quote it. Charlotte Bronte, Herman Melville, John Steinbeck, C.S. Lewis, Philip Pullman. You'll catch reference to Milton, to Paradise Lost, and to Satan throughout literature and throughout television and film as well, more and more once you are familiar with the epic. This is part of the joy in reading classic literature in general. It allows you to join a conversation that has been happening for centuries, and it allows you to see the mark that a text or an author has made on the literary record and on culture continuing through to today. That is as true for any piece of classic literature as it is for Paradise Lost, but with Paradise Lost, that conversation that you're joining is huge, and that mark that has been made on literature and culture is so substantial and so fascinating. Speaking of taking part in a conversation about Paradise Lost, I'm going to be doing a slow read of Paradise Lost throughout 2026. So if that's any appeal, you could consider that your third reason why you should read Paradise Lost. Read it so that you can participate in my slow read. Paradise Lost is very conveniently comprised of 12 books, and so I will be reading one book per month starting January 2026, carrying through all the way through to December. I will probably be making 1 or 2 videos about Paradise Lost here on YouTube as I'm doing this slow read across the year. I am definitely predicting that in September, when we get to book 9, I'm gonna have some things to say. If you know, you know. But for the most part, this conversation that I'm going to be facilitating about Paradise Lost is going to be taking place over on Substack. Over there, I'll be sending out a brief intro to each book at the beginning of the month and a discussion of my observations and analysis and just reading experience going through each book at the end of the month. There will also be a paid tier where for $2 a month, you will get an extra essay digging into some literary and historical context around the book that we're discussing that month. I've read Paradise Lost, I can't even tell you how many times. I read it for the first time 15 years ago, and in some ways it feels like I have been in a constant state of reading Paradise Lost over the past 15 years. But it's been a very long time since I've actually read the whole thing rather than skipping through parts and reading a book here, a passage there. So I'm really looking forward to kind of reconnecting with the text as a whole and experiencing it all the way through again, and doing that with other people, some of whom I'm sure will have read it before, but some of whom it will be their first time reading the entire text or possibly any portion of the text. The idea behind this slow read is to kind of foreground just personal feelings and reactions to the text, but to scaffold that in with some structure, with some analysis of the literature and the history and the influences and the critical perspectives that you can take when reading this text. And speaking of those literary and historical contexts, the historical moment out of which Paradise Lost emerges is, to me, very fascinating, and is yet another reason I have to give for why you should read Paradise Lost. You can use the reading of Paradise Lost as your entry point into studying this part of history, which is very narratively compelling on its own. Paradise Lost was first published in 1667, and John Milton probably started composing it in the late 50s and wrote a lot of it in the early 1660s. And if you know your 17th century English history, you know that in 1642, civil war broke out between the monarchy and the parliament, and that after many years of fighting, parliamentary forces won. That in 1649, King Charles I was executed, and that then there was an interregnum, a period without a monarchy during which England was ruled by a parliamentary government, at the head of which, for the most part, was Oliver Cromwell, until the Restoration in 1660. And not only was John Milton around for all of that, he was involved in all of that. Because Milton was not just a poet. He was not just out here writing sonnets and court dramas and epics. He was a polemicist. Milton had a lot of opinions about the ongoing debates of the day, and he made those opinions known. He weighed in on a lot of controversial topics. He wrote about theology, he wrote about censorship, about divorce. And shortly after the execution of Charles I, Milton wrote in defense of the decision to execute the monarch. He was a staunch supporter of the parliamentary cause and government. And so the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 sent him briefly into hiding, briefly into prison. And it's after all of this that he is writing this epic that touches on topics of tyranny and corruption and ambition and war between angels and loss of innocence. At the point at which he was composing Paradise Lost, he was poor and he was completely blind. He is the author of Paradise Lost, but the physical manuscript of Paradise Lost was written down by those he was dictating to, including his daughters. And when you take all of this history, all these political and cultural and personal facets, and you hold them up to the text, you get so much opportunity for analysis, so many new lenses through which you can read this story. Paradise Lost really is a text that rewards the amount of time you spend with it. The more you read and reread, the more you research, the more angles you try to look at this text from, the more you can get out of it. My final reason why I think you should read Paradise Lost relates to another way that you can slow down and spend time with this text. And that final reason is you should read this book so that you can experience the language of it. Maybe you don't want to read the whole thing, that's fine. Maybe you start reading it and you decide you're not going to see it all the way through to the end, that's fine. But if you're still watching this video, it's because you have at least some curiosity in the text of Paradise Lost. And one way that I really recommend you try to satisfy that curiosity is sitting down and reading it out loud to yourself. I currently own 3 editions of Paradise Lost, 4 if you count the fact that I own a complete works of Milton, and Paradise Lost is included in that one. But the first copy that I ever owned was this one. I bought this at a Borders bookstore when I was 17 years old for my AP Lit class. And if I remember correctly, there were a couple options I had to choose from on the shelves of that Borders bookshelf, but I chose this one because it had an introduction by Philip Pullman, the author of The Golden Compass and the rest of the His Dark Materials series. The phrase His Dark Materials, by the way, is a quote from Paradise Lost. And in his introduction to this book, Philip Pullman talks about how when he first experienced Paradise Lost, he had a teacher who insisted that he read it out loud, and that was foundational to his relationship with the text. In talking about all of the vivid imagery in Paradise Lost, he says, "To see these things and hear them most vividly, I found that I had to take the lines in my mouth and utter them aloud. A whisper will do. You don't have to bellow it and annoy the neighbors, but air has to pass across your tongue and through your lips. Your body has to be involved. The experience of reading poetry aloud when you don't fully understand it is a curious and complicated one. It's like suddenly discovering you can play the organ. Rolling swells and peals of sound, powerful rhythms and rich harmonies are at your command, and as you utter them, you begin to realize that the sound you're releasing from the words as you speak is part of the reason they're there. Paradise Lost isn't a story that should lie dead on the page in front of you. It's one you should interact with, not just by bringing it into your imagination, but by, as Philip Pullman says, getting your body involved. The language of Paradise Lost is so beautiful. It's so musical. And like many others before me, I wonder if part of the reason for that is that it was composed out loud rather than being written silently. Regardless of why it's true that this language is beautiful, the fact remains that it is true, that tasting the language and interacting with it and bringing it off the page into the air around you, it's such a treat. It feels good. And yes, the language is challenging. It's intense. I think of reading the language in this book as the literary equivalent of sitting down with a double espresso and a piece of dark chocolate. You savor it, you take your time with it. And again, I really feel like this text rewards the time you spend with it. If you have been watching this video because you are curious about Paradise Lost and you've been thinking about reading it, I hope that you do. Again, even if you just sit down with it for a little bit and give it a taste, give it a try. You know, it's in the public domain. You can find it for free online, and I'll link a couple places you can find it and that you can purchase it in the video description here. I'll also link to my Substack in case, as you're deciding that you are going to read Paradise Lost, you decide that you want my slow reading articles to be part of the way that you read it. And I'll sneak in at the end here a sixth reason, my most selfish reason, why I think you should read Paradise Lost, which is that the more of you who read Paradise Lost, the more people there are to talk to me about Paradise Lost, because I just want everyone to read the books that I love so that then we can all talk about it. Ultimately, I do think that is the best reason to read any book, is to talk about it, to find the other people who have read it, and to share your thoughts. Maybe I'll be the person who you share your thoughts with about this book, whether on YouTube or on Substack, or maybe just someone in your life who has read the book. You can find and you can sit down and you can talk about the book. And that's what it's all about.